Hello class, today we're going to take notes on Letter to John Adams and Lean In, which are the next two texts we'll be studying in class. What we're going to look at with these two texts, they're very similar. They're two that we're going to collaborate and compare with. And the first main concept that we're going to be looking at is analyzing author's purpose. Now, we've touched into this before, but we're going to be looking at two different types of texts. One is a letter, and one is an essay, and we're really going to be analyzing what is the purpose of them writing and how does that purpose change. Now, author's purpose is the reason he or she writes a text. Authors might write to persuade, to inform, to explain, express thoughts or feelings, motivate, or even to entertain. The various things that you read online, like BuzzFeed articles, for example, have vastly different purposes depending on where you're finding them, right? If we know something's coming from BuzzFeed or Inquirer or People magazine, it's most likely to entertain. But if we are looking at something from the National Geographic magazine, that's probably to inform or explain. A blog would be an example of something that expresses thoughts or feelings. Letters can motivate, but there can be motivational speeches and books as well. It just depends on what is being said, how it's being said, and to whom it's being said. Most authors have more than one purpose for writing. It's up to you to decipher what that purpose is, unless they obviously come out and tell you, which doesn't always happen. For example, a writer may want to inform readers about an important topic, but he or she may also want to persuade readers to agree with certain ideas or values. This is pretty common with informative texts that are published in private forums because, yes, we want to teach people what's going on, but we also want them to take action. You can determine an author's purpose by making inferences or logical guesses based on the use of key details, word choice, and tone in the text. We practice making inferences in term 1, but this is a skill that is really important when you're trying to determine purpose and meaning. An author's purpose may depend on their audience. Audience changes depending on when and where the text is written. So I want to clarify this point for a second, and we'll talk about it, I believe, on the next slide as well. But what I mean by it changes depending on when and where a text is written. So you must know your audience before you present anything. You wouldn't make a comment about a bad comment about Muslims, for example, in a country that is primarily made up of Muslim people, right? Because you will offend your audience. And if you make a joke or a bad comment to start off your speech or within your speech, your audience is going to just tune you out, right? So knowing your audience is really important when you're making a speech. But when something has already been written, you have to keep in mind there's a historical context that's behind that. There's a reason why that person gave this speech or wrote this text. And you need to figure out what that is, because maybe if somebody's writing about the rights of women and how women need to be educated, you could be reading it going, well, that doesn't make sense because women are educated, but maybe at the time they weren't, right? So you determine an author's purpose in part based on who they were speaking to and what was their catalyst, what was their reason for speaking, or what was their reason for writing. Purpose is related to both the text's message and its intended audience. Intended audience is different from the current audience, obviously, because we become an audience as we read something years later, right? But we're not the intended audience. We're not the people that the person originally wrote or spoke for. Message is the main idea that the author wants to convey. What are they trying to tell us? What is their takeaway? If we walk away from this speech, or we walk away from the text that we have read, what are we supposed to take away from it? Similar to theme, but this is more in relation to nonfiction. Audience are the readers the author wants to influence or affect. These are the people that the reader, or sorry, these are the people that the person writing, the author or the speaker, intended to reach. Authors support their purpose by adjusting tone and style to suit their audiences. So I wouldn't go in front of a national community of teachers and act all, like make a bunch of weird jokes and act all goofy and maybe like not have nice clothes on, like have a basketball uniform on and shirt untucked, all this stuff. No. I would change even my appearance and the way that I speak based on who I'm speaking to. So if I'm going in front of a panel of my peers, other teachers, I'm going to want to be dressed professionally. I'm going to use proper grammar, proper language, etc. If you're messaging or if you're sending an email to me, you will use proper language, a formal tone, etc. But if you're messaging your best friend, you'll be like, yo, what up? How's it going? LOL. You use slang and things are not as proper. It's very informal, and that's fine, but you know your audience and you know what message you're trying to convey. Is it a serious message or is it one that's more lackadaisical? Now, as we read the first text, you can use this in general, really, you can use this chart to help you analyze author's purpose. So you take details from the text on the left, and then on the right, you, based on those details, what inferences do you have about author's purpose? This in general will help you analyze author's purpose. I'll give you another chart later on that we may use. Now, the next concept we're going to look at within the next two texts is analyzing language, specifically voice and tone. An author's voice is, I should say, his or her unique use of language, which allows readers to hear a human personality in writing. Just think about when you read something and you kind of have that voice in your head that's reading it to you. That's voice. Literally, but figuratively also. Like it's how you envision the person speaking or intending the words to sound. The elements of style that determine a writer's voice include syntax, diction, and tone. Now, diction is really important. In general, it's the writer's choice of words, but it includes vocabulary, syntax, and it can change depending on the situation. So it can be formal or informal, which I already gave an example of. The difference between sending your teacher an email and sending your best friend a text message, for example. It can be common or technical. Now, common language is language that everybody understands and knows from day to day. But technical would be think content-specific words. So if I'm talking to a mechanic, and they're using technical terms, or if I'm talking to a doctor and they're using technical terms, I may not understand what they're talking about because I'm not a doctor. I don't know the words that are unique to their profession. Or diction can also be described as abstract or concrete. Concrete is you can literally put a finger on it. You know exactly what it is, but abstract is more up for interpretation. Now, when we're talking about diction, we're going to make a practice of not just saying the author uses diction, because obviously writers always use a specific choice of words. We can describe diction as being formal, informal, common, technical, abstract, concrete. We need to use those descriptive words to say more about the diction. Now, diction can also reveal an author's tone, which is the author's attitude towards the subject. And I mentioned syntax before. Syntax is the arrangement of words. So what do I mean by the arrangement of words? Think about where the nouns are. So noun, the tense used, the verb, the prepositions, etc. And think about the use of complex versus simple sentences, which you should have studied in previous years. But just the way the sentence is structured. A really good example of this that I have is Charles Dickens, who wrote a book. He wrote a lot, actually, but Bleak House is what comes to mind. And I don't think it's a huge novel, and I don't think the dude goes... I don't think he has a sentence, his first ending sentence, for like the first page and a half of his book. He writes in such long, complicated sentences, which are grammatically correct, but they're just so long. And that's his style. That's, his syntax is very lengthy, as opposed to The Dog Ran, which is very short. Now, this chart, specifically given to discuss the second text that we're going to read, is used to help you analyze language. So you'll write words or phrases that you wish to dig more into on the left, and then make inferences of what it reveals on the right. This can be helpful in interpreting figurative language, but it can also be helpful in determining why specific words, why specific diction was chosen for this particular message. Now, I mentioned the two different types of text that we're going to read, letter and essay. The first one, letter, some genre elements. Letters are addressed to a specific person or group. You don't normally write a letter to just a random, I shouldn't say it that way. You don't just write a letter to nobody. You address it to somebody. So for example, I might write a postcard or a letter to my mom. It may have a formal or informal tone, depending on the writer's purpose. So if I'm writing a letter to my senator or to the president of the United States, I'm going to use a pretty formal tone. But if I'm writing a letter to my best friend, I know that letters are a little outdated, but if I'm writing a letter to my best friend, it's going to be a little less formal, more informal. It may also convey personal information, share opinions, or make requests. Typically, if you're writing a letter to somebody, you know them quite well, unless you're writing a formal letter to somebody in which you're requesting something. I might write a letter to my senator asking him to veto a certain bill that's coming up, or to vote against a certain, ruling or whatever. Genre elements of essays, however, are slightly different. So an essay is typically a short work of nonfiction on a single subject. It may use informal language, but most of the time you're looking at formal language, and can be autobiographical, which means it can describe the life of oneself. An autobiography is a biography written by the person that the text is about. Now, within the next two texts, we have 8 vocabulary words, right? On the screen now are your 8 vocabulary words. What we're going to do today for the rest of class, well, maybe not the rest of class, but before you start working on your argumentative essay, you're going to define these words, which will appear in the next 2 texts that we read, as well as use each word in a sentence. Now, I've given a format for this in Google Classroom, and let me show you what that looks like and exactly what I'm asking you to do. But these are the words you'll use for your vocabulary. So if you went into Google Classroom and you found the assignment for today, you would have seen linked to that assignment this vocabulary example. So what you're going to do is replace the title with the title of these texts. So you will use you can just do letter and why am I stuck on this? Lean in, and then. These are just random words, and I know they repeat. It's just meant to show you what format this should be. You're going to put the word that you're defining in bold and underlined, okay? And then you're going to define the term. You can use the definitions from your textbook, which I actually recommend. You'll just have to go in the stories that we're reading. Then underneath that, you're going to use that word in a sentence, and you're underlining the word you're using in that sentence. So you should have 8 numbers, 8 words, 8 definitions, and 8 sentences in exactly this format. So what I recommend you do is copy this document, replace the words that are currently here with the words that are on the last slide of the notes that you just took, and then submit this assignment by 3 p.m. today. If you do have any questions, please reach out to me via email. Tomorrow we'll reconvene for a live class in which we'll start reading these texts. Please remember you also have a quiz on Thursday based on the text that we've read thus far. Anything we've read this week, however, will not be on the test. All right? Have a great day, guys. I will see you tomorrow.